The story of a young tech entrepreneur facing criminal charges now. The 31-year-old
Javice, the entrepreneur behind the student financial aid company Frank, was sentenced today to 85 months.
She was hailed as the next big tech visionary. She landed on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. She promised to fix the broken American student loan system. Instead, she allegedly orchestrated one of the most brazen, insulting, and frankly embarrassing corporate frauds in modern history. She didn't just trick venture capitalists, she successfully scammed the most sophisticated financial institution on Wall Street, right under the nose of CEO Jamie Dimon. How did a 20-something startup founder convince JPMorgan to buy a digital ghost town? And how did one disastrous email campaign bring the entire house of cards crashing down? To understand how Charlie Javice pulled this off, you have to understand the Silicon Valley obsession with the golden child. Charlie Javice grew up in a wealthy New York family. She attended an elite French-American private school where tuition runs around $40,000 a year, and eventually landed at the prestigious Wharton School of Business. In the startup world, pedigree is everything. If you speak the language of venture capital and have the right degree, investors will hand you millions before you even have a working product. In 2016, Javice launched a company called Frank. The pitch was genuinely brilliant. Every year, millions of American students struggle to fill out the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. It is a notoriously complicated, bureaucratic nightmare of paperwork.
We started Frank with really thinking about how are we the ally for the student and the family.
Frank was pitched as the TurboTax for financial aid. It would take this hours-long agonizing process and condense it into a simple 5-minute online application. Best of all, it was entirely free for the students. The media ate it up. Javice was featured in Fast Company Inc. magazine and eventually secured the ultimate tech world status symbol, a spot on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. She raised $20 million in venture funding and presented herself as a financial savior for the underprivileged student. But behind the glowing magazine covers, the company was a mess. Frank offered its service for free. It generated essentially zero revenue. It was burning through cash. Former employees later painted a picture of a toxic work environment driven entirely by a desperate need for user growth. When confronted with inaccurate numbers early on, Javice allegedly told her staff, "These old people don't understand. This is how it works. You fake it till you make it." And fake it she did. By 2021, Frank was bleeding money and Javice was desperate for an exit. She needed a buyer. Under CEO Jamie Dimon, JPMorgan is a multi-trillion-dollar juggernaut, but Dimon had a growing fear. The bank was losing the younger generation to sleek new fintech apps. Millennials and Gen Z don't want to walk into a physical bank branch. They want to do everything on their phones. To protect his empire, Dimon went on a massive shopping spree, looking to buy up fintech startups to capture young customers. When JPMorgan looked at Frank, their eyes lit up. University students are the holy grail of banking. If you can get an 18-year-old to open a Chase checking account, there is a very high statistical probability they will stick with Chase for life. They will get a Chase credit card, an auto loan, and eventually a mortgage. The lifetime value of that single student could easily be tens of thousands of dollars in interest and fees. In the summer of 2021, Javice sat down with JPMorgan's investment team. She didn't pitch Frank as a software tool. She pitched it as an acquisition machine. She claimed her platform had amassed 4.25 million highly engaged student users. JPMorgan did the math. If they paid $175 million for the company, that worked out to roughly $41 per user. If they converted even a tiny fraction of those 4.25 million students into lifelong Chase customers, the acquisition would pay for itself 10 times over. They agreed to the deal, but before they handed over the check, JPMorgan had to complete their due diligence. They asked Charlie Javice for a simple piece of evidence. Hand over the list of the 4.25 million names, emails, and phone numbers. Javice panicked. Why? Because the 4.25 million users didn't exist. Frank actually had fewer than 300,000 real accounts. Before we look at exactly how she fabricated almost 4 million human beings out of thin air, if you are enjoying this deep dive into corporate fraud, hit the subscribe button. It helps me bring you more investigations into these massive Wall Street failures. Javice was trapped. If she handed over the real numbers, JPMorgan would walk away instantly. If she admitted she lied, her career was over. Her first move was a classic stall tactic. She told JPMorgan's lawyers that she could not legally hand over the customer data due to privacy concerns regarding student information. While JPMorgan's lawyers debated the privacy issue, Javice allegedly went into full crisis mode. According to court documents, she approached her top engineer and asked him to generate millions of fake accounts. The engineer immediately smelled a rat, questioned the legality, and outright refused. Javice allegedly told him, "No one will end up in an orange jumpsuit." He still said no. Running out of time, Javice turned to an external source. She tracked down a data science professor at a New York college who specialized in creative solutions. For a fee of just $18,000, this professor wrote an algorithm that generated synthetic profiles. Creating fake names like John Smith is easy. Generating random phone numbers is easy. But creating 4 million realistic-looking email addresses and matching physical home addresses is much harder. Eventually, they compromised. They created a massive list of fake names, phone numbers, and physical addresses, but replaced the email column with randomly generated unique ID numbers, claiming this was the only way to satisfy the privacy restrictions. They sent this fabricated spreadsheet to JPMorgan's due diligence team. In an absolute failure of institutional competence, the largest bank in America looked at this synthetic list, rubber-stamped it, and wired the money. The deal closed. Charlie Javice personally pocketed roughly $10 million in initial compensation, plus a guaranteed $20 million retention bonus, and was named a managing director at JPMorgan Chase. She took to LinkedIn to boast about her fairy tale ending, but the fairy tale was about to turn into a nightmare. Once the acquisition was finalized, JPMorgan owned Frank, and they were eager to start monetizing their new multi-million-dollar asset. The marketing department decided to launch a massive email campaign targeting their newly acquired 4.25 million students to sell them Chase checking accounts. But remember, Javice had only provided unique IDs, not actual emails. To cover her tracks, she had quietly reached out to third-party data brokers and spent $105,000 buying massive lists of random student emails to merge with her fake database. JPMorgan loaded these emails into their system and pressed send on a test batch of 400,000 messages. Results were catastrophic. In digital marketing, a standard campaign might see a 20% to 30% open rate. When JPMorgan sent out the Frank emails, an astonishing 72% of the emails immediately bounced back as completely invalid or non-existent. Of the remaining emails that actually went through, the open rate was exactly 1%. JPMorgan executives were baffled. They looked at the data and realized that the people receiving these emails had never heard of Frank. The bank had sent targeted financial aid emails to completely random internet users. The reputational risk was horrifying. The bank immediately launched an internal forensic investigation. Because Javice was now a JPMorgan employee, the bank had full legal access to the Frank email servers. It didn't take long for the investigators to strike gold. Sitting right there in the email archives were the entire unencrypted conversations between Charlie Javice and the data science professor. JPMorgan had the literal receipts of the $18,000 payment to synthesize the fake students. JPMorgan immediately fired Charlie Javice and shut down the Frank website. In December 2022, they filed a massive federal lawsuit against her, accusing her of orchestrating an elaborate fraud. A few months later, the Department of Justice stepped in. Javice was arrested and charged with 4 separate counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy. She is currently facing decades in federal prison. CEO Jamie Dimon was forced to publicly admit to his shareholders that the acquisition was a huge mistake. What do you think is the craziest part of this scam? Let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you next time.